Thank you, Taylor. Good afternoon. We appreciate your time. Your thoughts. Kurt Signorri on camera signs his contract and a message to Indiana fans.
I loved it. I thought that was obviously a name that has been floating around the last couple of weeks and tied especially to that Penn State job. I think Signetti's path to becoming a head coach, a lot's been made of this. He didn't become a head guy until he was in his 50s and talked about, he's on that staff with Nick Saban and decides to take a leap of faith, go become a Division II head coach, then to James Madison and now to Indiana. And I think it probably benefits Indiana that he coached for a long, long time. He's seen how difficult it is to be a program builder, and maybe the grass isn't always greener. And what he's got and what he's built and the support that he has at Indiana, credit to Indiana for leaning in. Obviously, historically a basketball school, but they recognize what they have in Signetti, and vice versa with Coach Signetti. That he's clearly, it looks like, at least for now, going to try and stay long term at Indiana. And we see so little of that in college football these days. It feels like where everything is about lily padding to the next job. But Kurt Signetti and Indiana, they've set themselves up to be a partnership really for maybe through the end of Kurt Signetti's tenure as a head coach. I mean, he's in his 60s. So if he is there for another 10 years, maybe this ends up being his last stop. And I think it's great that he signed this long-term extension and Indiana got that done.
Okay, I'm going to make you Pat Kraft for a day. Who are you hiring?
So for where? I'm sorry.
For Penn State.
For Penn State. Pat Kraft. I'm sorry. I would go with Matt Rhule. I think you got to go. I think there's a number of ties, obviously, with for Matt Rhule, and I think Matt Rhule. It's interesting timing right now, obviously, with at Nebraska, I think you're looking, if you're Matt Rhule, at saying, is this a place where I can win a national championship? And I think the answer is probably not there. But Matt Rhule has been a program builder at all of his stops. And I think that would be a natural fit. If it's not him, man, I know there's been some crazy names that have been thrown out. I don't think Marcus Freeman leaves Notre Dame for this job. I don't think Mike Elko leaves A&M for this job. I think Matt Rhule, to me, that'd be the first person I'd call. And I think that's the guy that, despite what he said on the Pat McAfee show today, I think that's who I'd be beating down his door until you can get him.
Taylor, a lot of good games this weekend, man. What is your anticipation level for this Holy War that some are describing as the biggest Holy War ever because of the top 25 rankings, the place in the standings, the playoff opportunity? And there's still some weeks to play, but, man, this one's got about everything you can want if you're a BYU or Utah fan.
Yeah, I think the number one thing outside of this matchup, if you're a Big 12 fan, and we've talked about this, I think this game has massive implications for the Big 12. For any hopes and dreams that they have of being a two-bid league this season, it really leans on and relies on this game and this team, or one of these teams, whoever ends up winning this game. I think there's so much that's been made so far this season with Bear Bachmeier and how well he's played, and he deserves all the credit. I've been a big fan of his. This will be by far the most difficult matchup that he's faced so far this season. I think this will be the first time that you really see a defense try to move him off his spot and make him play left-handed a little bit, because so far this season, they've done everything well BYU has in terms of playing good team defense. Special teams has been sound. And this will be the first opportunity, I think, where you see a defense really try to heat him up and try to force errors that you would expect out of a freshman that he's avoided so far this season. So, this again, though, Texas Tech looks like the clear favorite, obviously, and they've got to win already over Utah. They play BYU later in the season. The winner of this game, if they can win out, and if that's BYU, that implies that they got to beat Texas Tech. You set yourself up for a potential path where the Big 12 could get two teams in, especially if the SEC kind of keeps round robining one another. But it really has to be one of these teams. So it'll be interesting to see. It probably means that Utah gets a win. We'll see, with already having the one loss to Texas Tech. But obviously this will be, and I agree with fans that are calling this as big a holy war as we've seen in a long time. It certainly feels that way.
Did you know, or when did that like the rivalry, the holy war, really get on your radar? Because for a lot of teams in the Big 12 or fans, they'd heard of it. But it was then all of a sudden they're in the conference over two separate different times when they joined, and now we got a full belly of it.
Yeah, I think, if you're a Pac-12 fan, I think this was obviously one that was on your radar for a long, long time. And going back to, I can remember some of these matchups in the early 2000s, when Urban Meyer took over at Utah. That was when I was in, the middle school, high school age for me, where staying up late, trying to beg my parents to, especially in middle school, let me watch whatever game was on late. And a lot of times BYU or Utah was in that primetime slot, especially if they were playing one another. I think what's interesting now is that their paths have sort of been parallel to one another with all the conference realignment, and especially in the last, call it 10 years. And I think BYU maybe's had a little more ebbs and flows where they've had some seasons where they've been spectacular, and they've also had some seasons where they've been down. But credit to both of those programs with all the craziness that's gone on around them in conference realignment. They have continued. The fan bases for both of those teams are phenomenal, and these two, when they play one another, they really don't like one another, and you got to have that in a rivalry, and they've got that in spades. Gosh, there was a guy that's freaking arrested this week for, I don't even remember what he did, but it was tied to his hatred in the Holy War. So, great game, huge matchup. It's I would say top 3 game this weekend, and college football playoff implications, which I know we're only midway point of the season, but you already have to start considering that.
Taylor, Tech rolling through. Do you think what would have to happen for the Big 12 to get 2 teams in?
Yeah, it's kind of what I was talking about a minute ago with, you play out scenarios, right? Arizona State is already out now. They basically, with the 2 losses, I think any way that you slice it at this point, they're probably out. TCU, there was just at the very beginning, first month of the season, you're looking and saying maybe this is a team that could be a dark horse that jumps up and wins the Big 12 or loses to Tech in the championship. All of those kind of dark horse contenders are kind of falling by the wayside. If Tech wins out, we got to look at the example from last year with the ACC, where SMU plays their way into the conference championship. They lose to Clemson, but because they played in the conference championship game, the committee honored their success to that point, and they didn't punish them for losing in the championship game. That means for the Big 12, I think you need to have both of these teams get to the conference championship with 1 loss or less, right? If you get to 2 losses and then you lose the conference championship, I don't think the conference is strong enough to get 2 teams in. But if it's Utah, if they were to win out the rest of the way, if it's BYU and their only loss, let's say, is Texas Tech, and then they lose to them again in a rematch, I think those are your 2 examples where maybe you get that second team in, and then you need it to be, does Texas get a 3rd loss? Does Notre Dame have a 3rd loss? What teams around you, the SEC continues to beat up on one another. The Big 12 benefits from the ACC being down again. Penn State's now out of the running. So it sets up for it, but I think the Big 12 really needs for both of their championship game teams need to have 1 loss or less in order to get 2 teams in my opinion.
Taylor, kind of a random question here, but have you been able to lay eyes on Jade Mayava much at USC this year? Just seems like he's had a great run there. Could you kind of go into why that is? And obviously a huge game coming up for Riley and company this weekend with the Fighting Irish.
Yeah, I think offensive line play has been a lot better for USC. Going back to the Caleb Williams season a couple years ago where they get to the championship game against Utah and he's getting annihilated in that game. The O-line play for USC has improved significantly since then. And Mayava, I think, is doing a nice job within that Lincoln Riley system. I think it's also been interesting that USC very quietly is just a 1-loss team at this point in the season. I thought a week ago, the most under the radar, of the major games was Michigan at USC. And it felt like that game really didn't have a lot of buzz about it. This week is kind of the opposite. It feels like, okay, now anytime USC and Notre Dame play one another, obviously it gets a lot of spotlight. But this is another game that has playoff implications. Notre Dame can't lose again. And I know their 2 losses are aging well. Miami playing extremely well and A&M playing well. But if they lose the 3rd game, you have to imagine that they're out and then that's it for Notre Dame in terms of their playoffs. Because again, they don't have a championship game that they're going to play in. For Mayava and SC, I think they're probably a year ahead of schedule, in my opinion, from where I thought they were at. But for as well as he's playing and not making critical errors, I think he does a really nice job of operating that system. And it looks like he plays with a lot of confidence to me. And I think that's what stands out most is the confidence that he plays with, and that their offensive line play is a lot better than it has been the last couple seasons.
All right, so there's a couple of other bangers to get your just feedback on it, including Ole Miss at Georgia. Chambliss has been fantastic, and then Tennessee at Alabama. And Alabama has owned that rivalry for a long, long time, but heck, they've owned a lot of them because of Saban's presence too. But your thoughts about those two?
Yeah, I would caution anybody that watched Ole Miss last week against Washington State and think that they're down all of a sudden. If you've followed Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss the last few years, the knock on them is that they sometimes will play down to their opponent. And I think that's exactly what happened against Washington State. The stadium is, 2/3 full, but that student section, there's nobody there. And their kids, Ole Miss played like it. There was not a lot of energy, not a lot of juice. You're going to get the opposite, obviously, going against Georgia. And I think this is a spot where if Ole Miss can find some success early and build a little momentum, Georgia's not built to play from behind. They're pretty limited on offense this year compared to in years past. I think this is a spot where, despite how underwhelming they looked a week ago, Ole Miss could certainly win this game. The other one, I think Tennessee has some issues. I think this is a game. Alabama is surging, and I think the way that they won and closed out a game against Missouri, a good Missouri team on the road, I think Alabama's playing as well as anybody in the country. I put them right behind Miami. It just in terms of that week 1 loss to Florida State, it feels like shocked the system. I think they completely underestimated Florida State, thought they were going to get the 2-10 version from a year ago. And since then, Ty Simpson's been unbelievable. 16 touchdowns to 1 interception. And that 1 interception, it's not like he's got a bunch of other turnover-worthy throws and he's been lucky. I think he's playing. We have to put together a Heisman graphic every week for our games with CBS, and I've got him. He's been on there for like the last 5 weeks because I think he's playing as good as anybody in the country right now at the quarterback position. But I think Alabama wins that. I think Alabama probably wins that convincingly. I think there's some issues with Tennessee right now. They did not look. It was not a convincing win a week ago for the Vols.
I mentioned dominated. They've won 15 of 17, but Craig was showing me that they've lost 2 out of 3 to Tennessee. So the Vols got him with Heupel, of course, as the coach at Tennessee.
Taylor, I need help. My Seminoles have lost the last 3 in a row. Their linebackers don't know what's going on. They can't stop a quarterback run. I need just anybody to tell me that it could be okay, because I don't feel like it is.
It might not be okay.
Okay.
I mean, look, this is a year. It's crazy the swings between last year to now. Last year, a 2-10 season and the bottom fully falls out. And you're saying, well, what the expectation going into this year, I thought was, they'd fix some pieces, but not all. And then you come right out of the gate and beat Alabama. And all of a sudden this becomes, man, could this be a team that completely flips the script and maybe is a college football playoff team? And then the way that they lost against Miami, completely dominated in the trenches on both sides, I think showed again that Florida State's still not there. Because that game at the end, the score doesn't really tell the story of that game. They were down, I think it was 4 scores, but I know it was at least 3 late in that game, and then climbed back to make it look a little closer. And then the 3 losses already in ACC play. It's not a great league. It's not a very deep league. I think when you look at, if you're Florida State and you're suing your league to get out of it, you can't have the run that they're on of, 11 straight that they've lost in league play.
It's 8 straight because it is 11 straight now. Yes, you're right. It was 8 straight coming in.
Don't make it.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I forgot the
8 straight last year, right?
Yeah.
Cal's a league game, of course. Classic league matchup in the ACC, Cal Bears versus Florida State. But no, I think saying, of course they're more improved than a year ago, but Florida State's in the same boat as Penn State. They're not interested in 8-9 wins, not interested in, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But I think the patience already for Mike Norvell is running thin. Still a lot of football left. I think if they run the table right, and you've got to win over Alabama to start the season, and you book in to run the rest of the stretch, and it ends up being a 9-3 year, I think you feel a lot better about yourself then. But man, the start of this season and the way that they have looked in the trenches, defensive line play especially, I think has been disappointing for Florida State.
We were talking about a bunch of highly ranked teams, and then Florida State got into the mix. You were looking for. All right, I have one question for you. This is a picture of you interviewing Sam Houston State's Phil Longo. That's an intimidating as hell man. And of course, he's been around. Were you a little bit fear of him? Did any kind of nervousness that he was going to take you out at any moment?
No, I mean, despite, anybody that doesn't know about Coach Longo, he's got a boxing background. I think he's had like 56 fights as an amateur when he was younger, but no, he's great. We've had him 3 weeks in a row, and Coach Longo's been, they're in a grind right now. They're completely rebuilding that roster and trying to implement a new system. But Coach Longo's been great, and I know, we always appreciate, especially for teams that are struggling in the win column, doing those interviews like that before the game. Sometimes coaches kind of, don't enjoy those, but he's been great. Ben, their SID, everybody for Sam Houston's been nothing but kind to us. But he is, he can look. Before I met him, I was like, man, this is an intimidating dude. He kind of looks like a military guy, but then you find out about the boxing background. You're like, okay, that checks out.
You could tell his nose is broken or something. He's probably won more than he lost. But thank you for your time, Taylor. Where are you at tonight? Or what's your schedule this week? I'm sorry.
No, I got 2 next week. I had the Sam Houston game last night. So we got another CUSA game next Tuesday, and then actually some Big 12 next Saturday. So
very nice.
Kind of bouncing around. But I tell you what, I am going to go study the name of Penn State's AD, because I freaking whiffed on that one. Y'all got me on that one. But thank you guys for always having me on.